9.5, choosing a method for solving quadratic equations, practice solutions. So for our first number 2, we have x squared minus 7x plus 12 is equal to 0. My factors of 12 are negative 3 and negative 4. That add up to be a negative 7, and that multiply to be 12. So this is going to factor out to be x minus 3 times x minus 4 is equal to 0. We're going to set both of these equal to 0, so x minus 3 is equal to 0, and x minus 4 is equal to 0. We add the 3 over. We get that x is equal to 3. We add the 4 over, and we have that x is equal to 4. So positive 3 and positive 4 are our solutions for this one. For 3, we have 36x squared minus 64 is equal to 0. So we're going to start by adding the 64 to both sides here. We get 36x squared is equal to 64. We then divide each side by the 36. So we get x squared is equal to 64 over 36. I then take the square root of both sides. I get x is equal to positive and negative 8 over 6, which is going to simplify to be plus or minus 4 over 3. So for 4, we have 4x squared minus 4x minus 3 is equal to 2. I'm going to move this 2 over by subtracting it from each side. And we are going to have 4x squared minus 4x minus 5 is equal to 0. So in this case, my a is 4, my b is negative 4, my c is negative 5. So I'm going to do x is equal to negative times negative 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared minus 4 times negative 5 all over 2 times 4. From here, my two negatives turn into a positive, so x is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared is 16 minus 4 times 4 is negative 16 plus, because a negative times a negative is a positive, 16 times 5 gives us 80 all over 8. So x is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of 96 all over 8. Oops. That 96, when we factor it, we know that 3 goes into it evenly 31 times, and it doesn't simplify any further. So we have x is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of 96 all over 8. For number 5, we are given 8x squared plus 9x plus 2 is equal to 1. So I'm going to move this 1 over. I'm going to get 8x squared plus 9x plus 1 is equal to 0. So my a is 8, my b is 9, my c is 1. Plugging this into our quadratic formula, we have negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 9 squared minus 4 times 8 times 1 all over 2 times 8. So this is going to simplify to be x is equal to negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 81. The negative 4 times 8 is negative 32 all over 16. The 81 minus 32 is 49. So we're going to have x is equal to negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 49 over 16. That 49 simplifies to be 7, so we have x is equal to negative 9 plus or minus 7 all over 16. So we're going to separate this into two equations. We have x is equal to negative 9 minus 7 over 16, as well as x is equal to negative 9 plus 7 over 16. So we simplify both of these, we get x is equal to negative 16 over 16, and x is equal to negative 2 over 16. So simplifying even further, we have x is equal to negative 1, and x is equal to negative 1/8. For 6, we are given 5x squared plus 0x minus 13 is equal to 0. So this is the same thing as saying 5x squared minus 13 is equal to 0. So if I wanted to solve this by adding the 13 to both sides and then dividing each side by the 5, I could do that. So x squared would equal 13 over 5. We would take the square root of both sides, and we would get x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 13 over the square root of 5, which we would then rationalize the denominator and multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 5. So we would get x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 13 times 5, which is 65, all over 5. For 7, we're given 7x squared minus 5x minus 5 is equal to 0. So I'm going to use my quadratic formula once more. So my a is 7, my b is negative 5, and my c is negative 5. So x is equal to negative times a negative 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times 7 times negative 5 all over 2 times 7. So this is going to simplify to be positive 5 plus or minus the square root of 25. The negative 4 times the negative 5 is a positive 20 times 7 is 140 all over 14. So from here, x is equal to 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 plus 140, which is 165 all over 14. That 165 is 5 and 33. And the 33 is just 3 and 11. So we can't simplify that any further, so it's just going to stay that 5 plus or minus the square root of 165 all over 14. For 8, we're given 3x squared minus 6x is equal to 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor this one. So I'm going to factor out the 3x to give me 3x, and x minus 2 is equal to 0. From here, I'm going to take both of these parts and set them equal to 0 and solve for x for each. For the 3x is equal to 0, I'm going to divide each side by 3, and x is 0. For the x minus 2 is equal to 0, I'm going to add the 2 to both sides and get x is equal to positive 2. So 0 and positive 2 are our solutions here. For 9, we have 2x squared plus 4x minus 3 is equal to 0. With this one, I'm going to use my quadratic formula. So a is 2, b is 4, c is negative 3. So x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 3 all over 2 times 4. Oh, sorry, 2 times 2 is 4. So this is going to leave me with negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16. The negative 4 times 2 is negative 8 times negative 3 is a positive 24 all over 4. From here, the 16 plus the 24 gives us 40. So x is equal to negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 40 all over 4. This is simplifying even further. That 40 is 4 and 10. The 4 is 2 and 2. So if negative 4 plus or minus 2 square root 10 all over 4 simplifies even further to give us 2, negative 2, and 1. So x is equal to negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 10 all over 2. For 10, we're given x minus 5 squared is equal to 16. We can actually take the square root of both sides here to get x minus 5 is equal to plus or minus 4. So this is going to be x minus 5 is equal to negative 4, and x minus 5 is equal to positive 4. We're going to add the 5 to both sides. We get x is equal to 1. and x is equal to 9. For 11, we have 2x minus 1 squared is equal to x. We are actually going to FOIL out that left side here, because if we take the square root of both sides, we are going to be left with the square root of x, and we don't want a radical. So we're going to FOIL 2x minus 1 times 2x minus 1 is equal to x. We are going to FOIL, so we have 4x squared minus 2x, which is negative 4x, plus 1 is equal to x. We're going to move that x over by subtracting it from each side. So we get 4x squared minus 5x plus 1 is equal to 0. So my a is 4, my b is negative 5, and my c is 1. So I'm going to plug these into my quadratic formula. I have a negative times negative 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times 1 all over 2 times 4. So x is equal to 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 16 all over 8. The 25 minus 16 is 9, so x is equal to 5 plus or minus the square root of 9 over 8. So we're going to have x is equal to 5 plus or minus 3 over 8. So this is giving us x is equal to 5 minus 3 over 8, as well as x is equal to 5 plus 3 over 8. For the 5 minus 3 is over 8, we're going to have x is equal to 2 over 8, and the 5 plus 3 over 8, we're going to have 8 over 8. So our x is equal to 1/4 as well as 1. Oops. There we go. For 12, we have 2 times x plus 2 squared minus 5 is equal to 3. I'm going to first add this 5 to both sides. We're going to have 2 times x plus 2 squared is equal to 8. Then I'm going to divide each side by 2. So x plus 2 squared is equal to 4. I'm going to take the square root of both sides. We have x plus 2 is equal to plus or minus 2. And I'm going to separate this into two equations to have x plus 2 is equal to negative 2 and x plus 2 is equal to positive 2. From here, I'm going to subtract 2 from each side. So x is equal to negative 4 and x is equal to 0. For 13, we have 2x minus 3 squared is equal to 4x. So again, I'm going to FOIL this because I can't take the square root of both sides and be left with a radical still. So we're going to do 2x minus 3 times 2x minus 3 is equal to 4x. We're going to get 4x squared minus 6x, so that's minus 12x, plus 9 is equal to 4x. We're subtracting the 4x from each side. So 4x squared minus 16x plus 9 is equal to 0. From here, I'm just going to use my quadratic formula. So I'm going to have x is equal to a negative times negative 16 plus or minus the square root of negative 16 squared minus 4 times 9 all over 2 times 4. These two negatives are going to turn into positive, so x is equal to positive 16 plus or minus that 16 squared gives us 256. And then that 4 times 4 is 16 times 9 gives us a negative 144. And this is all over 8. So from here, we're subtracting the 256 and the 144. We get the square root of 112. So x is equal to 16 plus or minus the square root of 112 all over 8. That 112, if we divided it by 2, we get 56. The 56 is 2 and 28. The 28 is 2 and 14. The 14 is 2 and 7. So 2 times 2 is 4 square root 7. So x is equal to 16 plus or minus 4 square root 7 all over 8. I'm going to simplify all these so that way I have x is equal to 4. 4 plus or minus the square root of 7 all over 2. For 14, we're given 6x squared minus 5x plus 12 is equal to 0. So again, I'm just going to use a quadratic formula. X is equal to a negative times negative 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times 6 times 12 all over 2 times 6. From here, those two negatives are going to become positives. So x is equal to 5 plus or minus the square root of 25. Negative 4 times 6 is 24. 24 times 12 is a negative 288. All over 12. The 25 minus 288 gives us a negative 263. So from here, because there's that negative underneath the radical, we have no solution. For 15, we have 3x squared plus 2x plus 2 is equal to 0. So our a is 3, our b is 6, our c is 2. I'm just going to use my quadratic formula. So x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 6 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2 all over 2 times 3. So x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 36. The 4 times 3 is 12 times 2 is 24 all over 6. So from here, we're going to have x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus the square root. The 36 minus 24 is 8. No, sorry, is 12 all over 6. From here, we have x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus the 12 is 4 and 3. The 4 is 2 and 2. So that's 2 square root 3 all over 6. We can simplify these. We're going to have a negative 3, a 1, and a 3. So x is equal to negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 all over 3. For 16, we have 1/2 x squared plus 3 plus 5 over 2 is equal to 0. So what I'm going to do is get rid of my fractions. I'm going to multiply this entire equation by my least common denominator, which is 2. So I'm going to distribute this in. We're going to have x squared plus 6x plus 5 is equal to 0. I'm just going to factor this one because my factors of 5 that add up to be a 6 are 1 and 5. So this is going to be x plus 1 times x plus 5 is equal to 0. I set both of these equal to 0. X plus 1 is equal to 0. X plus 5 is equal to 0. I'm going to move the 1 over by subtracting it from each side. So x is equal to negative 1. And x is equal to negative 5. For 17, we have 6x plus 7 times x plus 1 is equal to 26. So I'm going to FOIL this first. So the 6x times x is x. 6x squared. 6x times 1 is 6x. The 7 times x is 7x. If I add these, I'm going to get 13x. And then 7 times 1 is 7. I'm going to move that 26 over by subtracting it from each side. So I get 6x squared plus 13x minus 7 minus 26 is negative 19 is equal to 0. So from here, my a is the 6, my b is the 13, my c is the negative 19. So I'm going to have x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 6 squared minus 4 times 13 times negative 19 all over 2 times 6. Why did I do that? This is, okay, hold on. Not thinking. Totally thinking about something else and not what I'm doing. So this should be negative 13 plus or minus 13 squared minus 4 times 6 times negative 19 all over 2 times 6. So from here, I'm going to simplify. I get x is equal to negative 13 plus or minus the square root of 196 minus 4 times 6 is 24 times negative 19 gives us a positive 456 all over 12. So from here, x is equal to negative 13 plus or minus the square root. The 196 plus the 456 gives us 652 all over 12. That 652 is 2 and 326. The 326 is 2 and 163. The 163 does not, I don't think anything goes into it evenly. No. Okay. So we are going to have x is equal to negative 13 plus or minus 2 square root 163 all over 12. For part B, number 13, we are given 5x squared plus 19x is equal to 4. I'm going to move this 4 over, so that way I can use my quadratic formula, and I'm just going to subtract it from each side. We have 5x squared plus 19x minus 4 is equal to 0. So we're going to have x is equal to negative 19 plus or minus the square root of 19 squared minus 4 times 5 times negative 4 all over 2 times 5. So 19 squared is 361. So x is equal to negative 19 plus or minus the square root of 361 minus 4 times 5 is 20 times the 4 gives us a positive 80 all over 10. So 361 plus the 80 is going to give us the square root of 441. So x is equal to negative 19 plus or minus the square root of 441 all over 10. The square root of the 441 is 21. So x is equal to negative 19 plus or minus 21 all over 10. So we're going to separate this into two equations. We have x is equal to negative 19 minus 21 over 10, and x is equal to negative 19 plus 21 all over 10. The negative 19 minus 21 gives us 40. Negative 40, I think. 19 and 21 is 40. Yes, negative 40 over 10. And then the negative 19 plus 21 gives us 2 over 10. So this is going to be x is equal to negative 4, and x is equal to 1/5. For 14, we have x minus 8x is equal to 11. So we're going to subtract the 11 from each side. I get x squared minus 8x minus 11 is equal to 0. So again, I'm just going to use my quadratic formula. Negative 8 times a negative plus or minus the square root of negative 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 11 all over 2 times 1. So we're going to have positive 8 plus or minus the square root of 64 plus 44 all over 2. This is going to give us x is equal to 8 plus or minus the square root of 108 all over 2. The 108 is 2 and 54. 54 is 2 and 27. 3 and 9. 3 and 3. So 2 times 3 square root 3. So x is equal to 8 plus or minus 6 square root 3 all over 2. 2 becomes a 1, 6 becomes a 3, 8 becomes a 4. So x is equal to 4 plus or minus 3 square root 3. For 15, we have 3x squared is equal to 2x plus 7. I'm going to move the 2x and the 7 over by subtracting both. I have 3x squared minus 2x minus 7 is equal to 0. So I'm going to have x is equal to a negative times negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 7 all over 2 times 3. So this can become a positive, so x is equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of 4. The negative 4 times 3 is negative 12 times negative 7 gives us a positive 84 all over 6. Alright, so x is equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of 88 over 6. The 88 is 8 and 11. 8 is 2 and 4. 4 is 2 and 2. So x is equal to 2 plus or minus 2 square root 22 all over 6. These are all going to turn into 1s, and this will turn into a 3. So x is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 22 all over 3. For 16, we have 2x squared over 3 plus 3x over 4 is equal to 1. So I'm going to get rid of these fractions by multiplying everything by my least common denominator, which is 12. So the first fraction, I'm going to get rid of the denominator and multiply the numerator by 4. The second fraction, I'm going to multiply the numerator by 3 and get rid of the denominator. And then 12 times 1 is just 12. So we're going to have 8x squared plus 9x is equal to 12. I'm going to move that 12 over by subtracting it from each side. So 8x squared plus 9x is minus 12 is equal to 0. Alright, so from here I'm going to have x is equal to a negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 9 squared minus 4 times 8 times negative 12 all over 2 times 8. So x is equal to negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 81. The negative 4 times 8 is 32 times the negative 12 is a positive 384. And this is all over 16. If I add the 81 to the 384, I get 465. So x is equal to negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 465 all over 16. From here, I have the square root of 465, which does not come out evenly, so I'm going to divide this by 5. And I get 93. Then 93 is 3 and 31. So this does not simplify any further. So our answer is just what we have here, that negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 465 all over 16. For 17, we have y plus 3 squared over 4 is equal to 5. With this, we are going to multiply each side by 4 or everything by 4. To get rid of the 4 in the denominator, we're going to have y plus 3 squared is equal to 20. So this y plus 3 squared is just y squared plus 6x, or sorry, y plus 9 is equal to 20. We're going to subtract 20 from each side. We get y squared plus 6y minus 11 is equal to 0. From here, I have x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 11 all over 2 times 1. So x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 plus 44 all over 2. So x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 80 all over 2. That 80 is 8 and 10, 8 is 2 and 4, 4 is 2 and 2, 10 is 2 and 5. So it's 2 and 2, so 4 square root 5. So x is equal to negative 6 plus or minus 4 square root 5 all over 2. We simplify this even further. It becomes negative 3 plus or minus 2 square root 5. For 18, we have 0.75x squared minus 0.3x plus 0.03 is equal to 0. I want to get rid of my decimal, so I'm going to multiply everything by the greatest place number value, which is the hundredths. So everything's going to multiply by 100. So I'm going to have 75x squared minus 30x plus 3 is equal to 0. From here, I'm going to use my quadratic formula. To me, it's just easiest to do. So I have x is equal to a negative times negative 30 plus or minus the square root of negative 30 squared minus 4 times 75 times 3 all over 2 times 75. So from here, these two negatives turn into a positive. So I have 30 plus or minus the square root of 30 squared is 900 minus 4 times 75 times 3. So the 4 times 3 is 12 times the 75 gives us 900. And this is all over 2 times 75, which is 150. So we have x is equal to 30 plus or minus the square root of 0 all over 150. The square root of 0 is 0, so this is just x is equal to 30 over 150, which is 3 over 15, and that is 1/5. For 19, we have 1.4x squared minus 0.7x is equal to 0.2. So again, I'm going to multiply by my greatest place value, which is the tenths place, so it's going to be a 10. So I have 14x squared minus 7x is equal to 2. I'm going to move the 2 over by subtracting it. I have 14x squared minus 7x minus 2 is equal to 0. So again, I'm just going to use my quadratic formula of negative times negative 7 plus or minus the square root of negative 7 squared minus 4 times 14 times negative 2 all over 2 times 14. From here, I'm going to get a positive 7 plus or minus the square root of 49. The negative 4 times 14 times the negative 2 is going to give us a positive 112 all over 28. So the 112 plus the 49 is 161. So 7 plus or minus the square root of 161 all over 28. The 161 is divisible by 7 and 23. The 23 is not divisible by anything other than 1, so we're just going to leave this. The 7 plus or minus the square root is 161 over 28. For 20, we have 1 over 3x is equal to 2x minus 3 over 2. So our least common denominator here is 6x. So we're going to multiply the entire thing by 6x. So I'm going to have 2 times 1 is equal to 3x times 2x minus 3. The 2 times 1 is 2. The 3x times 6x, or sorry, 3x times 2x is 6x squared. And 3x times negative 3 is negative 9x. So I am going to move my 2 over by subtracting it from each side. So we have 6x squared minus 9x minus 2 is equal to 0. I'm just going to use my quadratic formula because, like I said, to me that's the easiest to use. So x is equal to negative times negative 9 plus or minus the square root of negative 9 squared minus 4 times 6 times negative 2 all over 2 times 6. So this is going to leave us with a positive 9 plus or minus the square root of 81. The 6 and the negative 4 and the negative 2 are a positive 8 times 6 is 48. So 81 plus 48 underneath that radical. And this is all going to be over 12. So x is equal to 9 plus or minus the square root of 81 plus 48 is 129 all over 12. The 129 is 3 and 43. However, the 43 you can't simplify. So we're just going to leave it the way it is. For 21, we are going to multiply each side by the other's denominator. So 2x minus 3, x plus 1. It's going to cancel out our denominators. So we are going to have 4x squared minus 3x plus 4x is just x. And then 1 times negative 3 is negative 3. On the other side, we have 10x squared minus 15x minus 6x, so that's negative 21x plus 9. I'm going to move the 4x squared over by subtracting it, which means I'm also going to move the x and the 3. So subtract the x, add the 3, set this all equal to 0. So 10x squared minus 4x squared is 6x squared. The negative 21x minus x is negative 22x, and 9 plus 3 is 12. These are all divisible by 2, so I'm going to divide everything by 2 to make this a little bit easier for myself. So I have 3x squared minus 11x plus 6 is equal to 0. So from here, x is equal to negative times negative 11 plus or minus the square root of negative 11 squared minus 4 times 3 times 6 all over 2 times 3. So x is equal to 11 plus or minus the square root of 121 minus 12 times 6 is 72 all over 6. The 121 minus 72 gives us 49. So x is equal to 11 plus or minus the square root of 49 over 6. So x is equal to 11 minus 7 over 6, and x is equal to 11 plus 7 over 6. So we are going to have x is equal to 4 over 6, and x is equal to 18 over 6. So our answers are 2/3 and 3. For 22, we have 5x times x minus 3 plus 4 times x plus 4 is equal to 31 minus 7x squared. So I'm going to distribute the 5x and the 4. So we have 5x squared minus 15x plus 4x plus 16 is equal to 31 minus 7x squared. From here, I'm going to combine my like terms. So I have 5x squared minus 11x plus 16 is equal to 31 minus 7x squared. The 7x squared I'm going to add to both sides. Same thing with the 31, I'm going to subtract it from each side. So that cancels out my right side. The 5 plus 7 is 12x squared minus 11x. 16 plus 31 is 47. Oh no, sorry, these are opposite signs, so we need to subtract them and keep it negative. So 31 minus 16 is 15, so this is a negative 15 is equal to 0. From here, I'm just going to use my quadratic formula. So x is equal to a negative times negative 11 plus or minus the square root of negative 11 squared minus 4 times 12 times negative 15 all over 2 times 12. From here, we're going to have a positive 11 plus or minus the square root of 121 minus 4 times 12 is 48 times 15 is 720. This is going to be a positive. And this is all over 24. So the 720 plus 121 gives us 841. So x is equal to 11 plus or minus the square root of 841 all over 24. The square root of 841 is 29. So this is x is equal to 11 plus or minus 29 over 24. So we're going to separate this. X is equal to 11 minus 29 over 24. And x is equal to 11 plus 29 all over 24. So from here, the 11 minus 29 is going to give us a negative 18 over 24. And 11 plus 29 is going to give us a 10, carry the 1, 40 over 24. We're simplifying both of these, so x is equal to negative 9 over 12, which is then x is equal to negative 3 over 4. And x is equal, if we divide both of them by 4, we have 10 and 6, which is then x is equal to 3 over 2. Sorry, 5 over 3. For 23, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to distribute. So we are going to have 2x squared minus 6x plus 7x squared minus 7 is equal to 2. I'm going to combine like terms on my left side. That's going to give me 9x squared minus 6x minus 7 is equal to 2. I'm going to subtract the 2 from both sides to give me 9x squared minus 6x minus 9 is equal to 0. So from here, I'm going to use my quadratic formula. So x is equal to a negative times negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 6 squared minus 4 times 9 all over 2 times 9. So x is equal to 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus the 9 times 9 is 81 times 4 gives us 321. And this 9 is negative, so this is positive. All over 18. So from here, x is equal to 6 plus or minus the square root of 324 or plus 36 is 360 all over 18. The 360 is 6 and 60. This 60 is 6 and 10, so that's 6 square root 10. So x is equal to 6 plus or minus 6 square root 10 all over 18. We simplify that even further to get x is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 10 all over 3. For 24, we have x plus 3 squared plus 6 times x plus 3 is equal to 16. So we are going to FOIL the first, and we are going to distribute the second to get 6x plus 18 is equal to 16. All right, so if we FOILed the first, we have x squared plus 6x plus 9 plus 6x plus 18 is equal to 16. So I am going to first subtract the 16 over from the 18, just get x squared plus 6x plus 9 plus 6x plus 2 is equal to 0. It's just going to make my life a little easier so that way everything's on the same side. And now I'm going to combine like terms, get x squared plus 12x plus 11 is equal to 0. Those factors of 11 are 1 and 11. They equal to 12. So x plus 1 times x plus 11 is equal to 0. So this is going to give you x plus 1 is equal to 0, and x plus 11 is equal to 0. We move the 1 over by subtracting it. We get x is equal to negative 1. We move the 11 over by subtracting it. Get x is equal to negative 11. For our next one, we have 9 times x minus 4 squared plus 4 times x minus 4 is equal to 0. Use your order of operations. You have to do the x minus 4 squared first. So that's going to be 9 times x squared minus 8x plus 16 plus, you can distribute that 4 as well, 4x minus 16 is equal to 0. From here, distribute the 9. So you're going to have 9x squared minus 72, x plus 16 times 9 is 144. Plus 4x minus 16 is equal to 0. From here, the 9x squared is going to change, or stay, sorry. The negative 72x is going to combine with the 4x. That gives us negative 68x. And the 144 minus 16 gives us 128. I'm going to use my quadratic formula only because, yes, I know I'm working with big numbers, but just prefer to just use the quadratic formula. So x is equal to a negative times negative 68 plus or minus the square root of negative 68 squared minus 4 times 9 times 128 all over 2 times 9. So this is going to leave me with x is equal to 68 plus or minus the square root of 68 squared is 4,624 minus 4 times 9 times 128 gives us 4608 all over 18. So this, I'm going to do the 4624 minus the 4608. I get 16. So 68 plus or minus the square root of 16 all over 18. From here, I'm going to have x is equal to 68 plus or minus 4 over 18. So this is 68 minus 4 over 18 and 68 plus 4 over 18. The 68 minus 4 is 64 over 18. The 64 plus 4 is 72 over 18. So if I divide the 64 and the 18 by, let's see, 2, I get 32 over 9. So x is equal to 32 over 9. And then the 72 and the 18 can both be divided by 9. So that's 8 over 2, which is 4. So 32 over 9 and 4 are solutions for this one. For 26, we have 3x plus 2 times x minus 1 minus 13 is equal to 2x times 2 minus x. So I am going to FOIL these two binomials to get 3x squared minus 3x plus 2x is negative x minus 2 minus 13 is equal to, distribute that 4x minus 2x squared. I'm going to combine like terms first, so I'm going to have 3x squared minus x minus 15 is equal to 4x minus 2x squared. I'm going to add the 2x squared to both sides. And I'm also going to subtract the 4x from each side. So I get 5x squared minus 5x minus 15 is equal to 0. I'm going to factor out a 5 here. So I have x squared minus x minus 3 is equal to 0. I don't have any factors of 3 that are going to give me a 1. So I'm going to use my quadratic formula. So x is equal to negative times negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 3 all over 2 times 1. So this is going to give me a positive 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 plus 12 all over 2. So simplifying this, we have x is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 13 all over 2. For our last one, number 27, we have 3x minus 5 squared is equal to 8x plus 3 squared. So I'm going to FOIL both of these. Again, it's 3x minus 5 times 3x minus 5 is equal to 8x plus 3 times 8x plus 3. So again, I'm FOILing. 3x times 3x is 9x squared. The 3x times negative 5 is negative 15 times 2 is negative 30x. And then negative 5 times negative 5 is a positive 25. For the other side, the 8x times 8x is 64x squared. Then the 8 times 3 is 24 times 2 is 48x. And 3 times 3 is 9. So from here, I'm going to move my 9x squared to the other side. The 30x I'm going to add to both sides. And the 25 I'm going to subtract from each side. Oops. So 64 minus 9 gives me 55x squared. The 48 plus 30 gives me 78x. And the 9 minus 25 gives me a negative 16. From here, again, I know it's big numbers, but I'm just going to work with my quadratic formula. To me, it's easier. So I'm going to have negative 78 plus or minus the square root of 78 squared minus 4 times 55 times negative 16 all over 2 times 55. So x is equal to negative 78 plus or minus the square root of 78 squared is 6,084 minus the 4 times 55 is negative 220 times negative 16 gives us a positive 3,520 all over 2 times 55, which is 110. From here, the 6084 plus the 3520 gives us 96, so negative 78 plus or minus the square root of 9604 all over 110. Now that 9604, the square root of it is 98. So this is x is equal to negative 78 plus or minus 98 all over 110. So I'm going to separate this into two equations. X is equal to negative 78 minus 98 over 110. And x is equal to negative 78 plus 98 all over 110. So negative 78 minus 98 gives us a negative 176 over 110. And then the negative 78 plus 98 gives us a 20 over 110. The 176 divided by 2 is 88. So x is equal to negative 88 over 55. X is equal to 2 over 11 for this one. And then we want to keep going with that 88 and that 55 to give us x is equal to negative 8 over 5. And x is equal to 2 over 11.